Hello, this is Jared from Commit to Quality, and today we're going to go over a new assertion method that has been added to Playwright version 1.2 now. We now have the ability to retry blocks of code until all assertions successfully pass. I think this is awesome, and it's got me very excited. It means that we can now make even our most flaky tests more stable and gives a bit more confidence even in the most flaky environments. So let's just jump right into the code and show you exactly what I mean. So as I said, this is a update to version 1.29, so make sure you've updated Playwright in your package file and you run an npm install. I've just got this basic test, and all this test is doing is go into the computer database website, add a computer, setting all the details, creating the computer, and asserting that the computer has been added. So let's just run that to make sure that works first. And I'll put it in headed so you can see it as well, but it might be quick anyway. There we are. So the test passed, no, all is good. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make the test fail by saying computer commit quality with an S at the end. Run that, and we should see that the test fails. It's looking for the name, and of course, the name of the computer doesn't have the S at the end, so it fails. Perfect. So now what I want to do is show you this new assertion method, the toPass, that's going to allow us to rerun this block of code again and again until our timeout is hit or until this assertion successfully passes. Of course, in our case, it's never going to successfully pass because I've always hard-coded the wrong name for the computer. So this is really easy to do. What I'm going to say is await, expect, like we would. And inside here, we want to say asynchronous and have the callback function here. And then we just want to add everything or whatever we want to retry. So in our case, it is everything. But in a real world situation, you might only have certain parts of your test inside it. And we want to say toPass at the end. Oh. toPass, which is the new method added. It's going to execute everything inside this block. In this case, it's everything. If an assertion fails in here, it's going to wait a certain time for the intervals, as you can see here, which we can overwrite, which we'll get into a second, and it'll retry running the code again. So let's go into the Playwright config. We've got a timeout there, and I'll describe all this in a second. Let's just show you it working. So of course, we never expect it to pass, but we do expect it to retry add in the computer. So here, it's going to fail. But instead of failing the test now, what you should see is it tries to add it again. It hasn't passed the assertion, so it's going to try again. And it's going to keep trying this until the timeout is met. There we are. So it failed. You can see test timeout of 20 seconds exceeded. And that's because it was still trying the code. Or you might be thinking is as you're looking at this, but isn't this the same as retrying a test? And well, yes, you would be right in this instance, but you've got to think of a bigger picture. You're able to scope to certain blocks of your code. So if something doesn't work, if it fails, a test retry would redo the full test. But in a real world situation, you would scope this kind of expect assertion retry to specific blocks of your code. So you're trying to eliminate wasting time having to retry tests right from the start. You may have specific issues with assertions in your tests where you know there is some flaky behavior. You could wrap that specific code in this assertion retry, and then you're reducing the need of retrying the test from the beginning. You're also not marking your test as flaky then. So on a test retry, it would fail. You rerun, if it passed, it says passed, but it was flaky. In this case, it's just going to say your test has passed because you're eliminating that kind of flakiness and you're saving time, like I said, which is the key thing here. As part of Playwright's documentation, they provided an example as well of an API call, and they were waiting for a response status to be okay. This is a really good example where if you do not have an okay status after a call, you'll just retry that specific API call until it passes, or of course until it times out. I should have the documentation up here, where you can see here that they've just wrapped this specific assertion and the call to the API example endpoint, and they've expected to be okay. And if it doesn't, it'll keep retrying that. And only the test will only continue then once it's actually past this assertion. Before we log off as well, I also want to state about the options. So we can change the timeout. So I could say timeout here be just say 5 hours. We'll put it 15,000. So it's 15 seconds. And we can also say intervals as well. By default, the intervals are 100 milliseconds, 250 milliseconds, 500, then 1,000. But we could override those. We could say intervals, and I could say 1 second, 2 second, 3 seconds, whatever we wanted to do on that. Now, when we're talking about timeout, you need to understand there's two different timeouts. And if you haven't seen my assertions video, I'd suggest go and have a look at that because we explain kind of web first assertion timeouts versus the default test timeout. If I go to the Playwright config, we have this expect, which has a timeout, which is for web first assertions, which means this one will wait up to 5 seconds. But then we also have this default test timeout, and this is the timeout that the test will use. So when it failed, as you can see, this failed after 20 seconds because that's what the default timeout is. So you need to understand that those are different as well. So this one will be the web first assertions, but when you're using expect to pass, that's going to take your global test timeout or whatever you've scoped it to in here. So if I just rerun this test, what we should see now is you won't notice the intervals because they're not much of a difference there. But what you'll notice is the test will time out after 15 seconds instead of 20, and the intervals have actually changed because I've overrode them in this property as well. Awesome. So there we go. It's failed at 15 seconds, timeout, because, of course, this test was failing. The aim is to always have stable tests and ideally not to need these type of methods, but we work in and live in the real world, especially with UI testing. We know how unstable things can be, and I can already think of many use cases where I can use this in my own work projects. So as always, if you do have any comments, please drop them down below. A like and subscribe is appreciated, and as always, thanks for watching.